The galaxy had a joke about humans. Every species knew it. Every trader whispered it in cantinas. Every diplomat smiled at it during long meetings. How do you make a human happy? Give them something to pet. It was funny because it was true. In 300 years since joining the Galactic Concord, humans had become famous for exactly one thing: being soft. Wonderfully, impossibly, almost stupidly soft. They adopted alien creatures as pets. They cried during sad stories. They said sorry when someone else bumped into them. They smiled at strangers. They gave warm food to travelers. They planted gardens on space stations and named their ships after feelings like hope and new dawn. Ambassador Alara Chen was the perfect example of this strange species. She served on Station Nexus 7, a massive trading hub where hundreds of alien races came together to do business. Everyone loved Alara. She remembered names. She asked about families. She brought small gifts to meetings and always found something kind to say. The Vixari delegates called her Little Mother. The insectoid Zixari considered her a true friend. Even the grumpy, thorned merchants smiled when she walked past. Humans, the other species would say, shaking their heads or their tentacles or whatever they had. Strange creatures, but harmless, completely harmless. Nobody asked why humans were this way. Nobody wondered if there was a reason behind all that gentleness. Why would they? Humans were simply born soft, like flowers were born with petals. That was the natural order of things. But there was one species that did not find humans charming. The Kreth Dominion saw them as something else entirely. The Kreth were reptilian warriors, cold-blooded in body and spirit. Their empire spanned 40 star systems, all taken by force. They had claws that could tear through metal. They had teeth designed for ripping flesh. They had no word in their language for mercy because they had never needed one. To the Kreth, humans were prey animals, grass-eaters, worm-blooded weaklings who had somehow stumbled into space without deserving it. The fact that such soft creatures held 20 colony worlds was an insult to the natural order. The strong should rule. The weak should serve. This was the Kreth way. War Admiral Voreth, the Conqueror, had been watching humans for years. He had seen them back down from conflicts. He had seen them offer compromises when they should have shown strength. He had seen them apologize for things that were not their fault. They have no spine, he told his warriors. They have no fire. When we push, they will crumble like wet sand. So the Kreth began to push. It started small. A Kreth warship would enter human space and refuse to leave. Human diplomats would ask them politely to go. The Kreth would eventually leave, laughing at the humans who could not make them do anything. Then it grew bigger. Kreth raiders attacked human cargo ships. Humans filed complaints with the Galactic Concord. The Concord did nothing. The Kreth laughed harder. Now, Voreth was ready for the final push. His warfleet arrived at Station Nexus 7 on a cold morning by station time. 50 warships, bristling with weapons, arranged in attack formation around a peaceful trading hub. He called it a diplomatic visit. Ambassador Alara Chen met him in the main conference hall. She wore simple clothes. She carried no weapons. She smiled as she always did. War Admiral Voreth, she said warmly, welcome to Nexus 7. May I offer you some refreshments? We have excellent tea from Earth. Voreth towered over her. He was 3 meters tall, covered in dark green scales, with eyes like yellow fire. He looked down at this tiny human female and felt nothing but contempt. I did not come for tea, grass-eater, he said. His translator made the insult clear. I came to inform you of new realities. The other delegates in the room shifted uncomfortably. Zixari, watching from a corner, felt her antennae twitch with worry. Of course, Alara said, still smiling. Please tell us what brings you here. Voreth bared his teeth in what might have been a grin. The Kreth Dominion has decided to expand. Your species holds worlds that should belong to stronger races. This is wrong. We will correct it. The room went silent. "We claim 3 of your colony worlds," Vorath continued. "New Valentia, Port Harmony, Sunrise Station. You will withdraw your people within 30 standard days. If you do not, we will remove them ourselves." Alara's smile did not change. Her voice remained pleasant. "War Admiral, I understand tensions have been high, but surely we can discuss this. The Conquered has rules about territorial disputes. Perhaps we could arrange a mediation session and find a solution that works for everyone." Vorath slammed his fist on the table. The metal dented under his strength. "Mediation," he laughed, a harsh sound like rocks grinding together. "You wish to talk while warriors act. This is why your species will always be prey. You have no strength, no courage, no fire in your blood." He leaned close to Alara, so close she could smell the meat on his breath. "You are cowards," he whispered, "and cowards do not deserve worlds." The other aliens in the room looked away. Some felt pity for the humans. Some felt embarrassed to witness such humiliation. None of them expected the humans to do anything about it. Alara stood very still. Her smile stayed in place, warm and polite as always. But Zixari, who had known her for years, noticed something strange. The smile was only on Alara's mouth now. It had not reached her eyes. Those eyes had gone quiet, still, like the surface of deep water hiding something beneath. "War Admiral," Alara said softly, "I must ask you to reconsider. The Galactic Conquered does not permit territorial seizure by force. If you proceed with this action, there will be consequences." Vorath laughed again. "Consequences, from you? What will you do, little flower? Ask us nicely to stop, offer us tea and kindness." He spat on the floor at her feet. "Humans have no consequences. Humans have only words." The room held its breath. Alara looked at the spit on the floor. She looked back up at Vorath. For just a moment her smile flickered. "I see," she said quietly. "Then I suppose we have nothing more to discuss today." She turned and walked out of the room. Her steps were calm, her posture was straight. She did not look back. Vorath watched her go and laughed with his warriors. "You see," he shouted to the room, "she runs away like all humans, like all prey." But Zixari was not laughing. She was staring at the door where Alara had disappeared. In all her years of friendship with the human ambassador, she had never seen that look in her eyes. It was the look of someone who had just made a terrible decision. Zixari felt something she had never felt before in her life. She did not have a word for it in her language. Later, she would learn the human word. Fear. Something was wrong with the humans. Zixari noticed it first. She was an information broker, trained to see what others missed. And in the 72 hours after that terrible meeting, she saw things that made her feel cold inside. The humans had stopped smiling. Not all at once, not obviously, but where there had been warmth, there was now politeness. Where there had been laughter, there was now silence. The human traders on Nexus 7 still did their jobs, but they moved differently. Their steps were harder. Their eyes were focused. They looked through people instead of at them. At first, Zixari thought she was imagining things. Humans were emotional creatures. Perhaps they were simply upset about the Kreth demands. It would pass. But then she saw something that stopped her cold. A human cargo handler bumped into a Thorned merchant in the corridor. For 300 years, humans had apologized for such things. They said sorry even when it was not their fault. Everyone knew this. The cargo handler did not apologize. He looked at the Thorned with flat eyes, nodded once and kept walking. The Thorned stood frozen in the corridor, his mouth hanging open. He had never seen a human do that. Nobody had. Zixari found Alara in her quarters that evening. The ambassador was sitting at her desk, reading something on her screen. She was not smiling. She was not frowning either. Her face was simply empty. "Alara," Zixari said carefully, "what is happening? Your people are acting strange." Alara looked up. Her eyes were calm and distant, like stars seen through thick glass. "We are hopping the Kreth will reconsider," she said. Her voice was flat. "We are giving them time to make a better choice." "And if they do not?" Alara did not answer. She turned back to her screen. Zixari felt that strange feeling again. That fear. She left without another word. Across the galaxy, messages were moving through hidden channels. Old communication networks that had not been used in centuries suddenly came alive. The messages were short. They were encrypted. They all said the same thing. "Awaken the sleepers." Deep beneath the oceans of Earth, in bunkers that appeared on no official maps, ancient machines began to hum. On Mars, inside mountains that everyone thought were natural formations, massive doors opened for the first time in 300 years. In the asteroid belt, rocks that were not really rocks started to move, their surfaces splitting open to reveal the metal underneath. Nobody in the galactic conquered knew about these places. Humans did not talk about them. They did not talk about a lot of things from their past. There was a reason humans were so gentle. It was not because they were born that way. It was because they had chosen to be that way. And they had made that choice because they remembered what they had been before. Long ago, before humans reached the stars, they had nearly destroyed themselves. They called it the Great Collapse. 400 years of war, greed, and hatred that had killed billions. Weapons that poisoned the air. Machines that burned entire cities. Humans fighting humans while their world died around them. When it finally ended, when the survivors crawled out of their bunkers and saw what they had done, something broke inside the human spirit. They looked at the ashes of their civilization and made a promise. Never again. They swore to be better. They swore to be kind. They swore to lock away the monsters inside themselves and throw away the key. When they finally reached the stars and met other species, they introduced themselves as peaceful explorers, diplomats, traders, healers. And they buried everything else. The weapons, the warships, the terrible knowledge that had almost ended their species. They hid it all and tried to forget. But they never truly forgot. The darkness was still there, sleeping in the shadows, waiting. They had not destroyed it. They had only put it to sleep. Now someone was waking it up. On New Valentia, the Kreth invasion began. 50 warships dropped out of hyperspace and began bombarding the colony. Vorath had expected the humans to flee. He had expected them to beg for mercy, to send desperate messages asking for peace. Instead, the colonists sent a single transmission. It was not for the Kreth. "We will hold, send the word." Across human space, that message spread, and something old and terrible began to stir. Alara requested one final meeting with War Admiral Vorath. He agreed, expecting to enjoy her tears and pleas. He arrived at the conference room with a smile on his scaled face. Alara was already there, standing alone at the center of the room. She wore different clothes now, not the soft robes of a diplomat but something else, something that looked almost like a uniform. "War Admiral," she said, her voice was quiet, controlled. "I have come to give you one last chance." Vorath laughed. "One last chance, for what? To beg. I have already taken New Valentia, little flower. Your people are dying as we speak." "They are not dying," Alara said. "They are waiting, as we all were, as we have been for 300 years. Something in her tone made Vorath's laugh fade slightly. "I am going to say this clearly," Alara continued. "Withdraw your forces now. Release all prisoners. Pay reparations to the families of those you have harmed. Do this and this ends. Refuse, and you will face consequences beyond anything you can imagine." Vorath stared at her. Then he began to laugh again, louder than before. "Consequences, from grass-eaters, from prey." He stepped forward until he was towering over her. "You make me laugh, little human. You have no warships. You have no warriors. You have nothing but words and empty threats." He spat at her feet again. "Run home to your gardens, coward. Run home and hide while the Kreth take what is ours." Alara looked at the spit. She looked up at Vorath, and for the first time her expression changed. Her face went still, completely still, like stone, like ice, like something that had stopped pretending to be alive. "Now you have really pushed it," she said. The words were quiet, simple, but somehow they filled the entire room. Zixari, watching from the doorway, felt her legs go weak. Every instinct in her body, instincts developed over millions of years of evolution, was screaming at her to run. Vorath felt it too. For just a moment, a flicker of something crossed his reptilian face, something that might have been doubt. But he pushed it away. Humans were prey, everyone knew that. He laughed one more time and walked out of the room. That night, every human ship in the galaxy disappeared from its assigned location. Trading vessels, transport ships, diplomatic cruisers, all of them gone at the same time without a word. The stars went quiet, and the galaxy began to realize that it had never really known humans at all. 2 weeks passed. The Kreth celebrated their victory. War Admiral Vorath sent broadcasts across his empire showing the conquest of New Valentia. Kreth warriors posed with their weapons in front of burning human buildings. Vorath himself gave speeches about the weakness of humanity, about how easy it had been to crush these soft creatures. "Let this be a lesson," he announced proudly. "The grass-eaters bend before the strong. Soon we will take their other worlds. Soon we will stand on Earth itself." His warriors cheered. His empire rejoiced. Everything was going exactly as planned. Then the report stopped. A Kreth supply fleet carrying food and weapons to New Valentia went silent. 20 ships gone, no distress signal, no emergency beacon, no debris. They simply disappeared. Vorath sent scouts to investigate. The scouts disappeared too. He sent a full battle group, 40 warships, his finest warriors, his most experienced commanders. They jumped into the system where the supply fleet had vanished. 1 ship returned, just one. The others were gone, destroyed in less than 3 minutes. The survivor was a young Kreth officer. His scales had turned white. His eyes were wide and empty. When they asked him what happened, he could only say one word: "Humans." Vorath refused to believe it. He demanded details, explanations, but the young officer had no words left. Whatever he had seen out there in the darkness of space had broken something inside him. The next day, the galaxy learned the truth. A massive fleet emerged from hiding. Thousands of ships appearing from nowhere, filling the space around New Valentia like a swarm of angry insects. But these were not insects. These were warships, real warships, the kind that had not been seen since the darkest days of human history. The Galactic Conquered had never imagined such vessels. Dreadnoughts the size of small moons, covered in weapons that science said should not exist. Carrier ships that held thousands of smaller attack craft. Cruisers that moved faster than anything that large should be able to move. And at the center of it all, a flagship so massive that it bent light around itself like a small star. The humans called it the Leviathan Fleet. They had built it during the Great Collapse when they were fighting themselves. They had used ships like these to burn each other's cities, to crack each other's continents, to push their entire species to the edge of extinction. And when the war ended, when they had sworn never again, they had not destroyed these terrible weapons. They had hidden them. For 300 years, the Leviathan Fleet had slept in secret places throughout human space. The peaceful traders and gentle diplomats of the Galactic Conquered had been sitting on top of the most powerful military force in galactic history, and nobody had known. Until now. The Kreth forces at New Valentia tried to fight. They lasted less than an hour. Human warfare was nothing like what other species practiced. The Conquered believed in honor duels, in matched fleets meeting in open battle, in giving enemies a chance to surrender with dignity. Humans believed in none of these things. Human doctrine was simple. Win fast, win completely, win so thoroughly that the enemy could never threaten you again. They attacked supply lines before they attacked ships. They destroyed communication networks before they destroyed weapons. They used fear as a weapon, letting some enemies escape just so they could spread terror. They did not fight fair. They fought to end wars, not to win glory. Within days, every Kreth force outside their home territory had been destroyed or captured, not defeated, erased. It was as if the entire Kreth invasion had never happened. And leading it all was a woman the galaxy had known as a gentle ambassador who liked tea and remembered birthdays. Elara Chen stood on the bridge of the flagship Prometheus Unbound. She no longer wore diplomatic robes. She wore a military uniform, black and silver. With symbols that had not been seen in 3 centuries, her face was calm, her eyes were cold. She was not Ambassador Chen anymore. She had never really been Ambassador Chen. Her true name, her true rank, was Fleet Admiral Elara Chen. She had served in the Mars pacification during the final years of the Great Collapse. She had commanded ships that burned cities. She had made decisions that killed millions. And when the war ended, she had put away her uniform and tried to become something better. For 300 years she had succeeded. For 300 years she had been kind and gentle and everything humans wanted to be. Now she remembered what she really was. Within 6 days, the Leviathan fleet had surrounded the Kreth home system. 40 star systems conquered over centuries, and humans had reached the heart of the Dominion in less than a week. The Kreth Emperor screamed demands into his communication systems, asking how this was possible, asking where these ships had come from. Nobody answered him. Instead, a broadcast went out, not just to the Kreth but to every corner of the galaxy. Every species, every station, every ship received the same message. Elara's face appeared on screens everywhere. Behind her, visible through the viewport of her flagship, was the Kreth homeworld, the planet where Voreth had been born, the heart of the Dominion. To the citizens of the Kreth Dominion, Elara said, her voice was soft but it carried weight that made listeners feel small. Your leaders made a choice. We gave them every opportunity to make a different one. They refused. What happens next is not cruelty. It is consequence. She paused, and her eyes seemed to look through the screen, into the hearts of everyone watching. To everyone else in the galaxy, she continued, watch carefully, remember this. We did not want this war, we never want war, but we will not be prey, we will not be victims. If you threaten our people, if you harm our children, if you mistake our kindness for weakness, you will learn what we learned long ago. The broadcast ended with 5 simple words that would echo through history. Humanity remembers what it is. Across the galaxy, species that had laughed at humans suddenly stopped laughing. Species that had dismissed them as harmless suddenly locked their doors. Species that had been planning their own conquests suddenly changed their minds. The grass-eaters had teeth after all, and those teeth were sharper than anyone had ever imagined. The war lasted 11 days. Not because the Kreth surrendered quickly. They were warriors. They had never surrendered in their entire history, and they would not start now. They fought with everything they had, every ship, every soldier, every weapon in their empire. It was not enough. Humans did not give them glorious battles. They did not line up their fleets for honorable combat. Instead, they took apart the Kreth military piece by piece like a surgeon removing a disease. Supply lines were cut first, then communications, then shipyards, then defensive stations. By the time Kreth commanders realized they were under attack, they had already lost. The wider galaxy watched in silence. No one spoke at diplomatic meetings. No one sent messages of support or concern. Everyone simply watched, unable to look away from the horror unfolding before them. The Vexari ambassador, an ancient being who had lived through 3 galactic wars, sat in his quarters and shook. Did we know? He whispered to himself. Did any of us know what they were hiding? Zixari heard about the battles from her network of informants. Each report was worse than the last. Human ground forces had landed on New Valentia not to liberate the colony but to hunt. They had lists, names of every Kreth soldier who had harmed civilians, photographs, locations. Nothing was forgotten. The Kreth who had followed the rules of war were captured and treated fairly. The Kreth who had killed innocents, who had tortured prisoners, who had laughed while burning homes, were found no matter where they hid. Human soldiers tracked them through jungles and mountains and underground bunkers. They tracked them for days without rest, without food, without stopping. When they found them, justice was swift. "They remember everything," a Thorned merchant told Zixari. "I heard a human officer say that they have been keeping records since their own great war. Every crime, every criminal, they never forget and they never forgive." Zixari thought of Alara, her friend who had always seemed so kind and forgiving. She wondered if that woman had ever truly existed. War Admiral Voreth made his last stand in the Kreth home system. He gathered every remaining ship, every surviving warrior, and prepared to die with honor. He would take as many humans with him as possible. History would remember him as a hero. The humans did not give him a hero's death. Instead, they used something called the Helios Protocol. Voreth did not understand what it was until it was too late. One moment, his fleet had full shields, ready for battle. The next moment, every shield in his armada failed at once. A weaponized pulse from the human fleet, something that manipulated the stars themselves, had stripped away every defense. The battle lasted 4 minutes. Voreth's flagship was disabled, not destroyed. Human boarding parties cut through the hull and found him on his bridge, surrounded by the bodies of his guards. He expected them to kill him. He wanted them to kill him. A warrior's death was all he had left. They did not kill him. Instead, they put him in restraints and took him to stand trial. A human trial with human judges, following human rules. He was forced to sit in a courtroom and listen as witness after witness described what his warriors had done. Civilians who had lost families, children who had lost parents, survivors who would carry scars forever. The trial lasted 3 weeks. Voreth was not allowed to speak except to answer questions. He was not allowed to defend his honor or explain his reasons. He was simply forced to listen. When it was over, the judges did not sentence him to death. Death, they said, would be too easy. Instead, they sentenced him to witness. He would spend the rest of his life watching his empire rebuilt by the species he had tried to destroy. He would see Kreth children learning human languages, playing with human children, growing up in a galaxy where his conquests meant nothing. This, the humans said, was justice. The Kreth Dominion did not survive the war, but the Kreth people did. Humans did not believe in punishing entire species for the crimes of their leaders. They broke the empire into 40 independent systems and offered each one membership in the Galactic Concord. They helped rebuild cities they had destroyed. They fed refugees they had created. It was confusing to watch. One moment, humans were terrifying weapons of vengeance. The next, they were helping Kreth farmers plant crops and Kreth doctors treat patients. The same soldiers who had hunted war criminals now played games with Kreth children and taught them human songs. Zixari finally understood when she visited a refugee camp on what had once been Kreth territory. She saw a young Kreth child, a female barely old enough to walk, standing in a doorway. The child's eyes were wide with terror because a human soldier was walking toward her. The soldier, a woman with short gray hair and kind eyes, stopped a few meters away. She slowly knelt down until she was at the child's level. Then she reached into her pocket and pulled out something small and wrapped in colorful paper. A candy bar, human chocolate. "It is okay," the soldier said softly. "The war is over. We are the nice ones again now." The child did not move at first. Her eyes darted between the soldier and the candy. Finally, slowly, she reached out and took the gift. The soldier smiled, a real smile, warm and gentle. Zixari watched as the child bit into the chocolate, her eyes widening at the sweet taste. The terror faded from her face, replaced by simple wonder. The soldier stood up and continued on her way, as if nothing important had happened. But something important had happened. Zixari had seen it. The monster that humans became when pushed too far was real. She had witnessed its power. But so was this other thing, this kindness that came after the storm. Both existed inside humans, always waiting. The monster was back in its cage. The gentle creatures had returned. But Zixari would never forget that the cage existed. And she knew, with absolute certainty, that the rest of the galaxy would never forget either. Ilara visited Voreth one time in his prison. She stood outside his cell, looking at the broken warrior who had once spat at her feet. "Why," he asked, his voice was hollow, "why did your kind pretend to be weak?" Ilara considered the question for a long moment. "We were not pretending to be weak," she said finally. "We were trying to be better. We were trying to be what we wished we had always been." She paused. "You reminded us what we really are. I do not know if I should hate you for that or thank you." She turned and walked away, leaving Voreth alone with his thoughts and his regrets. The humans returned to their old ways. They smiled again. They said sorry when bumped. They adopted alien pets and planted gardens on space stations. The Leviathan fleet vanished back into its hiding places, sleeping once more. But nothing would ever be the same. 50 years passed. The galaxy healed, but it never forgot. The Kreth War became the most studied event in modern galactic history. Every military academy taught it. Every diplomatic school analyzed it. Every species that reached the stars learned about it before they were allowed to join the conquered. The humans went back to being gentle. They mediated disputes between angry species. They healed dying planets with their strange talent for growing things. They adopted alien creatures that no one else wanted and loved them like family. They cried at sad stories and laughed at silly jokes and said sorry when they bumped into people. The Leviathan fleet returned to its hidden places beneath oceans and inside asteroids. The terrible weapons went back to sleep. The uniforms were put away in closets that nobody opened. To a young species meeting humans for the first time, they seemed exactly as the old stories described. Soft, kind, harmless. The sweetest creatures in the galaxy. But the young species quickly learned that appearances could be deceiving. The older members of the conquered made sure of it. They called it the talk. Every new species received it, usually within their first year of conquered membership. A senior diplomat from one of the ancient races would sit down with the newcomers and explain certain things. Things that were not written in any official document. Things that everyone needed to know. "The humans are wonderful," the diplomat would say. "They will help you when you are in need. They will share their food and their medicine and their knowledge. They will be the best friends you have ever had. You will love them." The newcomers would nod happily at this news. "But you must understand something," the diplomat would continue, leaning closer. "You must never threaten them. You must never harm their children. You must never, ever mistake their kindness for weakness." The newcomers would look confused at this point. "There is something inside humans," the diplomat would explain. "Something from their past, from a time when they nearly destroyed themselves. They keep it locked away. They choose to be gentle because they know what happens when they are not gentle. But if you push them too far, if you make them feel they have no other choice, they will open that cage." The diplomat would pause here, letting the words sink in. "If they open that cage, you will not survive what comes out. No one survives it. The Kreth learned this lesson and their empire no longer exists. Do you understand?" The newcomers always understood. And so the phrase, "now you have really pushed it," became famous throughout the galaxy. People used it as a joke sometimes, when someone was being annoying or when a game was getting competitive. But there was always a nervous edge to the laughter. Everyone knew where the phrase came from. Everyone knew what it meant. 50 years after the Kreth War, a new threat emerged. The Thornari were a young species, aggressive and ambitious. They had only recently discovered faster-than-light travel, and they were eager to prove themselves. They looked at the peaceful species of the conquered and saw weakness. They looked at the gentle humans and saw prey. History, it seemed, was about to repeat itself. A Thornari diplomatic delegation arrived at Station Nexus 7, the same station where Voreth had made his demands half a century before. They were loud and aggressive, making threats and issuing ultimatums. Their ambassador, a creature covered in sharp spines and battle scars, demanded that several border systems be handed over to Thornari control. The human ambassador assigned to meet them was an old man named Thomas Chen. He had white hair and a gentle face, and he walked with a slight limp from an injury long ago. He was, by all appearances, completely harmless. He was also the grandson of Fleet Admiral Ilara Chen. Thomas listened patiently as the Thornari ambassador shouted and threatened. He nodded at appropriate moments. He offered compromises and alternative solutions. He suggested peaceful ways to resolve the dispute. The Thornari ambassador rejected everything. He banged his fist on the table just as Voreth had done decades before. He called humans weak and soft and cowardly. He demanded submission. Throughout all of this, Thomas kept smiling. It was a warm smile, grandfatherly and kind. He seemed completely unbothered by the threats. The other species in the room were not so calm. The Vexari delegates had gone pale green. These Ixari observers had their wings pressed flat against their bodies. Even the Thornid merchants, usually so grumpy and indifferent, were sweating. All of them were staring at Thomas, watching his face, waiting for something. The Thornari ambassador noticed the strange silence. He looked around at all these terrified faces and felt confused. "Why do you all look so afraid?" he demanded. "I am the one making threats here. I am the one with the powerful fleet. Why are you not afraid of me?" Thomas's smile did not change, but something shifted in his eyes, something old and patient and very, very tired. "They are not afraid of you," he said quietly. The room went completely still. The Thornari ambassador stared at this gentle old man, this soft human who should have been terrified. And slowly, very slowly, understanding began to dawn on his face. He thought of the stories he had heard about humans, stories he had dismissed as exaggeration, stories about a fleet that could darken the stars, stories about a species that had once burned themselves nearly to extinction and had learned to do the same to anyone who threatened them. He looked into the old man's kind eyes and saw something moving in the depths, something that was waking up, stretching, beginning to pay attention. The Thornari ambassador swallowed hard. "Perhaps," he said carefully, "we could discuss those compromises again." Thomas's smile warmed a few degrees. "I think that would be wise." The negotiation was concluded within the hour. The Thornari agreed to every human proposal. They signed treaties of friendship and cooperation. They promised to be good neighbors to the conquered. As the Thornari delegation left the station, their ambassador looked back one more time at the old human who had shown him mercy. Thomas waved goodbye, still smiling, still gentle, still apparently harmless. The ambassador shivered and walked faster. That evening, Zixari's granddaughter asked her about the old stories. The young insectoid had heard rumors about humans, about something called the Kreth War, about a phrase that made everyone nervous. Zixari, now ancient and wise, settled into her chair and considered how to explain. "There are 3 things all wise beings know," she said finally. "The stars are vast, entropy comes for all, and you must never push a human past their patience." Her granddaughter tilted her head. "But humans are so nice, so gentle, why would anyone be afraid of them?" Zixari thought of Ilara, her old friend who had shown her kindness and taught her fear in equal measure. She thought of the war she had witnessed, the monsters and the angels, the destruction and the candy bars, the terrible and beautiful truth of humanity. They are nice, she agreed. They choose to be nice every single day, even when it is hard. That is what makes them wonderful. She paused. But choice is not the same as nature. Inside every human there is something else, something they keep locked away because they love us too much to let it out. She leaned closer to her granddaughter. If you are wise, you will love them and respect them and never give them a reason to open that cage. Because the kindest creatures in the galaxy are also the most dangerous. And that, little one, is why all creatures flee when a human says those 5 terrible words. Her granddaughter nodded slowly, understanding at last. Somewhere in the vast darkness of space, hidden beneath oceans and inside asteroids, the Leviathan fleet slept on, waiting, hoping it would never be needed again. But ready, always ready, just in case.